Where are they? My pictures. Ah, they're gone. You moved them. It's a better arrangement, isn't it? No, it can't be. Not this. Not now.
When I walked into my living room after 3 weeks away, I knew something was wrong before anyone said a word. Every photograph of me was gone. My wedding portrait, the Christmas picture where I held my newborn son. Even the silver frame beside my late husband Thomas's chair had disappeared. In their place were photographs of my son David, his wife Rachel, and their daughter Emily, as if they had always been the only family who lived there. Rachel smiled when she saw me staring. "We just thought the house needed a fresh start, Martha." But that night, something behind the fireplace caught my eye. A corner of an old photograph was sticking out from behind the wooden mantel, and when I pulled it free, I recognized my husband's handwriting on the back. If you've ever felt pushed aside by someone you loved, tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're comfortable sharing, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to stay with me, because what I discovered behind that fireplace changed everything I believed about my family. I stood in front of the fireplace with the photograph trembling between my fingers. For several seconds, I forgot about Rachel's new curtains, the missing family portraits, even the strange feeling that had followed me through every room of my own house. All I could see was Thomas. He looked about 35 in the photograph, which meant it had been taken more than 3 decades earlier. His hair was still thick and dark then, and he wore the faded denim jacket he had refused to throw away for nearly 20 years. I was standing beside him, young Martha. My hair reached my shoulders, and I was wearing a pale summer dress with tiny flowers across the front. One of my hands rested against Thomas's chest, while the other held a set of keys. Behind us stood this house, our house. The white siding looked newer. The maple tree near the driveway was barely taller than Thomas. The porch railing hadn't yet been replaced, and standing on my other side was Thomas's younger sister Helen. I remembered that afternoon, or at least I thought I did. It had been shortly after Thomas and I finally believed the house was truly ours. David had been a little boy then. We had struggled for years counting grocery money at the kitchen table and praying the furnace wouldn't break before payday. But I couldn't remember why Helen had been there. Then I turned the photograph over. The handwriting stopped my breath. Thomas had always written in heavy, slightly crooked capital letters. For Martha. "If they ever make you feel like you don't belong here, remember who made this home possible." I read it twice, then a third time. "Who are they?" "Thomas," I whispered. The house was silent. I looked toward the hallway. David and Rachel had gone upstairs almost an hour earlier. Emily's bedroom door had closed shortly afterward. I lowered myself onto the edge of the sofa. Why would my husband have written something like that? More importantly, why had he hidden it behind the fireplace? Thomas had been dead for 3 years. For the first 2 years after his death, I had lived alone. David called every Sunday. Rachel brought Emily over for dinner occasionally. They worried about me, or at least I believed they did. Then 6 months ago, David told me his family needed somewhere temporary to stay. Their lease was ending. They wanted to save money toward another home. I had 4 bedrooms, and more silence than I knew what to do with. So I said yes. Of course I said yes. How was my son? Now I looked around the living room and realized how much had changed since they arrived. At first, Rachel had asked permission. "Would you mind if I moved this chair? Could we put a bookshelf here? What do you think about lighter curtains?" Somewhere along the way, the questions had stopped. And now my photographs had disappeared. I slipped the Polaroid into the pocket of my cardigan. The next morning, I woke before everyone else. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the photograph in front of me. Morning light made Thomas's handwriting easier to see. I traced the edge of the picture with my thumb. I missed him suddenly with such force that my chest hurt. Thomas had never been a dramatic man. If something broke, he fixed it. If he loved you, he showed you by filling your gas tank before winter, or bringing home the pie you liked without mentioning why. He would not have hidden that message as a joke. What are you looking at? David's voice came from behind me. I nearly dropped my coffee. He stood in the kitchen doorway wearing sweatpants and a gray t-shirt. His eyes went immediately to the photograph. Something changed in his face. Not curiosity, recognition. He crossed the kitchen faster than I expected. Where did you get that? I placed my hand over the photograph. Good morning to you too, Mom. There was an urgency in his voice that made me straighten. Where did you find it? I studied him. Why? He glanced toward the staircase. I'm just asking. No, you're not just asking. His jaw tightened. I turned the photograph around so he could see it. Do you remember this? David barely looked at the image. His attention went to the back, to Thomas's handwriting. I haven't seen that in years, he said. My heart gave a slow, heavy beat. That wasn't the answer I expected. You've seen it before. He hesitated. Only for a second. But mothers learn their children's silences long before their children learn how to lie. I probably saw it when I was a kid. You just said you haven't seen it in years, that's what I meant. David, you were maybe 8 when this was taken. He rubbed his face. It's an old picture, Mom. Why are we interrogating each other over it? I'm not interrogating you. I flipped it over. I'm asking whether you know why your father wrote this. His expression hardened. No. Then why did you look frightened when you saw it? I wasn't frightened. He reached toward the photograph. Let me see it. I pulled it back. His hand remained suspended between us. For one uncomfortable second, neither of us moved. Then I slid the photograph into my cardigan pocket. David stared at the pocket. Where exactly did you find it? There it was again. Not what does it mean? Not why would Dad write that? Where did you find it behind the fireplace? The color seemed to drain from his face. Behind it. Yes. What do you mean the wooden trim near the mantel? It was tucked behind it. David walked out of the kitchen. I followed him. He went directly to the fireplace, not generally toward it, directly to the section of wooden molding where I had found the photograph. He ran his fingers along the edge. That was when something cold settled inside me. You knew where to look, I said. He stopped. What? You walked straight to the exact spot, because you told me it was behind the fireplace. I didn't tell you which side. He turned toward me. For a moment I saw something in my son's eyes I had never expected to see directed at me. Calculation. Then it disappeared. Mom, you're making something out of nothing. Maybe. I kept my voice calm. But yesterday, every photograph of me disappeared from my house. Today, I find one photograph your father deliberately hid, and you seem more concerned about where I found it than why he hid it. David sighed. Rachel was redecorating. She removed photographs from my bedroom. He said nothing. She removed the picture beside my bed, David. I'll talk to her. And my albums. His eyes shifted. That tiny movement answered more than words could have. You knew about those too. Mom, where are they? They're safe. The words hit me harder than I expected. Safe. As though my own memories required protection from me. Bring them back. We'll talk about it later. No. You'll bring them back. Footsteps sounded upstairs. Rachel. David lowered his voice. You're getting upset over things that can be fixed. I looked at my son and suddenly remembered Thomas's message. If they ever make you feel like you don't belong here. I had assumed those words belonged to some distant danger Thomas had imagined. Now I wasn't so sure. David stepped closer. Give me the photograph, Mom. No. His expression tightened again. It belonged to Dad too, and he addressed the message to me. Neither of us spoke. Then Rachel entered the hallway. What's going on? David looked at her. Just one glance. But I saw it, and Rachel saw the photograph in my hand. Her smile disappeared. That was the moment I understood something I wished I hadn't. David had not been surprised that the photograph existed. Rachel wasn't surprised either. They were surprised that I had found it. I folded my fingers around the Polaroid. For the first time since returning home, the missing photographs frightened me less than the one photograph they had failed to erase. Because whatever Thomas had been trying to tell me 30 years ago, my son desperately did not want me to understand it now. Rachel recovered faster than David did. By the time she reached the living room, the alarm I had seen on her face had already disappeared. She folded her arms and looked at the Polaroid as though it were nothing more than an old grocery receipt. "Oh," she said. "That picture." Those two words stayed with me. "That picture. You've seen it before," I asked. Rachel glanced at David. "I think so. Maybe when we were cleaning." "Cleaning where?" David interrupted. "Mom, can we not turn this into another argument?" Another argument. We had not even had our first one yet. I slipped the photograph into my cardigan pocket. I asked Rachel a question. Rachel exhaled impatiently. "I don't remember, Martha. There were boxes everywhere. Your house has accumulated 40 years of stuff." My house. At least she still called it that when speaking directly to me. "Where are my photograph albums? They're packed safely in the basement." Why we needed space. For what? She gestured around the room. For living. I looked at the walls. There were 7 framed photographs in the living room now. David and Rachel at a resort in Florida. Emily at her middle school graduation. A Christmas portrait of the 3 of them. David holding a golf trophy. Not one photograph showed me. Not one showed Thomas. It wasn't redecorating. It was replacement. "I want my photographs returned today," I said. Rachel's lips tightened. "Fine." I expected resistance. Her quick surrender made me more suspicious. Then she added, "But honestly, Martha, I think you need to decide whether you want this place to feel like a home or a museum." I stared at her. Thomas's photograph was heavy in my pocket. It felt like a home for 37 years before you moved into it. Rachel looked away first. Over the next several days, I began noticing things I had somehow failed to see before my trip. My blue ceramic bowl had disappeared from the entry table. Rachel's mail occupied the basket where Thomas used to leave his keys. The quilt my mother made had been removed from the guest room. Even the kitchen was different. My cast iron skillet had been moved to the garage because Rachel said it was too heavy and old-fashioned. My dishes had been pushed to an upper cabinet while hers filled the shelves I could reach easily. None of those things was important alone. Together they told a story. I was being moved out of my own life, one object at a time. Thursday afternoon. I heard voices near the front door. Rachel was speaking to a woman I didn't recognize. "Yes, we've been here about 6 months," Rachel said. I stopped halfway down the hallway. The woman laughed. "You've done so much with the place already. We're trying. It was very dated." I stepped into the living room. Rachel saw me. Her expression changed immediately. The woman turned. "Oh, hello. This is Martha," Rachel said. Then she smiled. "David's mother. She's staying with us for a while." I felt something inside me go perfectly still. The woman smiled politely. "How nice." I looked directly at Rachel. "Actually, this is my house." Silence. Rachel gave a little laugh. "Yes, technically. I just meant we're all together right now. Technically." The woman sensed the tension and left within minutes. When the door closed, I turned to Rachel. "Don't ever introduce me that way again." She rolled her eyes. "I misspoke. You said I was staying with you. Martha, you're making every little thing into a crisis. Because every little thing seems to be pointing in the same direction." Her face hardened. Before she could answer, Emily came downstairs. She looked from Rachel to me. "Mom." "Nothing's wrong," Rachel said quickly. That sentence had become very popular in my house. "Nothing's wrong. Nothing happened. You're imagining it. You're overreacting." That evening, Emily knocked softly on my bedroom door. "Grandma, come in, sweetheart." She slipped inside and closed the door behind her. Emily was 16, but sometimes I could still see the little girl who used to climb onto my lap with peanut butter on her fingers. She sat beside me on the bed. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." She gave me the look teenagers reserve for adults who lie badly. "No, you're not." I smiled despite myself. "I'm working on it." She became serious. "Grandma, there's something I think you should know." My stomach tightened. What she picked nervously at the sleeve of her sweatshirt. I heard Dad and Mom talking before you came back. About what you. I waited. They were arguing. About me? Emily nodded. Dad said they needed more time. Mom said they'd already waited long enough. Waited for what I don't know. Her voice dropped. But then Mom said something about getting the house ready. My hands went cold. What exactly did she say? Emily tried to remember. She said, once Martha moves somewhere smaller, we won't have to redo everything twice. For a moment I couldn't speak. Did your father answer? He said you wouldn't agree if they pushed too hard. I stood. Thank you for telling me. Grandma, please don't tell them I said anything. I won't. I kissed her forehead. Later that night, I found David alone in the kitchen. We need to talk. He looked tired. Can this wait? No. I sat across from him. Are you planning for me to move? His eyes narrowed. Where did that come from? Answer me. He leaned back. We've discussed options. You and Rachel. Yes. Without me, we're worried about you. I almost laughed. You're so worried about me that you removed every photograph of me before telling me that has nothing to do with this. Then tell me what does. David rubbed his forehead. Mom, you're 67. This house is big, the stairs are steep, the yard needs work. I know. I've lived here since before you learned to tie your shoes. You don't need 4 bedrooms, neither do you. That silenced him. I leaned forward. You moved here because you said you were saving for another house. We are. Then why are you discussing what happens to mine? His jaw tightened. Because eventually we have to be realistic. About what? About the future. My future. Our family's future. There it was. The word our had somehow stopped including me. This house is too much for you anyway, he said. I looked at my son for a long moment. Then I stood. When it becomes too much for me, David, I will decide what happens next. He didn't follow me. The next morning I went outside to collect the mail before Rachel could. There were several envelopes. Electric bill, a catalog, a letter from my insurance company, and one thick white envelope addressed specifically to me. The flap was already torn open. I stood beside the mailbox staring at it. Someone had opened my mail. Inside was a formal notice I didn't understand at first. Then I saw the words, property valuation request. My address was printed underneath. I had never requested a valuation. At the bottom was the name of a local property services company. I read the letter again. Someone had contacted them about determining the current market value of my home. My fingers tightened around the paper. Through the front window I could see David standing in the kitchen. He was watching me. Neither of us moved. Then his eyes dropped to the opened envelope in my hand. And for the first time, my son looked like a man who knew his secret had arrived in the morning mail. I stayed beside the mailbox until David disappeared from the kitchen window. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Property valuation request. I read those words again as I walked slowly toward the house. 3 days earlier, I might have marched inside and demanded an explanation. But something had changed in me. Thomas's hidden photograph had taught me one important lesson. David knew more than he was telling me. And if I confronted him every time I discovered something, I would also be telling him exactly how much I knew. So I folded the letter, slipped it into my purse, and entered the house, as though nothing had happened. David was pouring coffee. Anything important, he asked. I placed the electric bill and catalog on the counter. Nothing that can't wait. His eyes moved toward my purse. Wasn't there another envelope? I looked at him. What envelope? For a fraction of a second he froze. Then he shrugged. Thought I saw one. I smiled. Must have been the catalog. That was the first lie I had deliberately told my son in years. I hated how necessary it felt. After breakfast, David left for work. Rachel said she had errands. Emily was at school. At 10 o'clock, I closed my bedroom door and called the number printed on the valuation letter. A woman named Susan answered. I gave her my name and address. Yes, Mrs. Simmons, she said. I have the property here. I'd like to know who requested the valuation. There was a pause. Are you the homeowner? I am. She asked me several verification questions. Then I heard typing. The initial inquiry came from a David Simmons. My stomach tightened. My son. Yes. He indicated that he was assisting his mother with preparing the property for transfer. I gripped the telephone. Transfer to whom? I don't have that information. We were only contacted regarding valuation. Did he say I authorized him? Another pause. He said he was handling the preliminary steps on your behalf. I closed my eyes. Did you speak with me at any point? No, ma'am. Then please make a note that I did not request this valuation and have not authorized anyone to transfer my property. Her voice became more formal. Absolutely. After ending the call, I sat on the edge of my bed, preparing the property for transfer. The phrase kept circling through my mind. I remembered David saying the house was too much for me. I remembered Rachel introducing me as someone staying with us. I remembered my photographs disappearing. Suddenly, those incidents no longer seemed separate. I went downstairs. For the next 2 days, I watched. Really watched. Friday afternoon, I found Rachel standing in the dining room taking photographs with her phone. She photographed the windows, the hardwood floors, the built-in cabinet Thomas had restored himself. "What are you doing?" I asked. She jumped, then smiled. "Just taking pictures. Of my dining room. I was showing a friend what we've done with it." "Which friend? Why does that matter?" "It doesn't." I smiled and walked away. Saturday morning, David spent nearly an hour in the garage with a tape measure. I watched through the kitchen window as he measured the walls, the garage door, even the distance between the driveway and side fence. When he came inside, I asked casually, "Planning to buy a new car?" He frowned. "What, you were measuring the garage?" "Oh, no. I was just checking something." "What?" He opened the refrigerator. "Storage." Another answer that answered nothing. That afternoon, a memory returned to me. Before my trip to Indianapolis, a woman had visited the house. Rachel had introduced her as Melissa, a friend from the neighborhood. They had walked through the downstairs rooms while I prepared tea. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now I remembered something else. Melissa had asked how old the roof was. Friends didn't usually ask that. That evening, I searched the woman's name online. Melissa Grant, licensed real estate agent. I stared at her photograph on my computer screen. Same woman, same carefully styled blonde hair, same smile. I closed the laptop when I heard footsteps. David passed my doorway without stopping. I waited until he went downstairs. Then I locked my bedroom door. For the first time in my life, I felt the need to lock a door inside my own home. I began searching for my property documents. Thomas and I had always kept important papers in a gray metal document box on the upper shelf of my bedroom closet. Birth certificates, insurance policies, tax records, the deed to the house. Thomas used to joke that if the house ever caught fire, I should grab that box before his bowling trophies. I pulled a chair toward the closet. At 67, I had no business balancing on chairs, but anger apparently improves flexibility. I reached the shelf. The box was there. Relief washed through me. I carried it to the bed. The small brass lock was already open. I stared at it. I always locked that box. Always. I lifted the lid. Our birth certificates remained. Thomas's death certificate remained. Several old insurance policies were still inside. I flipped through the folders. Property taxes, utilities, medical records. But the deed was missing. I searched again. Nothing. I emptied the entire box onto the bed. Still nothing. Then I noticed something else. A folder labeled House Legal Documents was missing too. My hands began to shake. Someone had gone through the box. Someone knew exactly what to take. I heard laughter downstairs. David and Rachel. For one terrible moment, I wanted to storm down there with the empty box in my hands. Instead, I sat quietly. I thought about Thomas. He had always told me that anger was useful only when you gave it a job. "Don't waste it making noise, Martha," he once said, after someone cheated us on a home repair. "Make it help you think." So I thought, if David had taken those papers, there had to be a reason. And if he believed I didn't know they were missing, I had an advantage. I returned everything to the metal box exactly as I had found it. Then I placed it back on the closet shelf. That night at dinner, Rachel talked about repainting the hallway. David discussed work. Emily barely spoke. I listened. Halfway through dinner, Rachel said casually, "Martha, have you ever thought about one of those nice retirement communities?" David stopped chewing. Emily looked up. I put down my fork. "No. There are some beautiful ones around Columbus. I like this house." "Of course, I just mean eventually." I smiled. "Eventually I'm going to die too, Rachel. I'm not scheduling that tonight either." Emily almost choked on her water. David frowned. "Mom, what we're discussing the future." Rachel forced a smile. After dinner I went upstairs. I closed my bedroom door and took Thomas's Polaroid from beneath my mattress. I read his message again. "If they ever make you feel like you don't belong here, remember who made this home possible." Until that moment, I had focused on the first half. Now I focused on the second. Remember who made this home possible. Why had Thomas chosen those exact words? Why not remember, "This is your home"? Why not remember, "I love you"? There was something behind that sentence. Something about the house. Something Thomas believed I might someday need to remember. I placed the photograph safely inside my purse. Then I looked toward the closet. My deed was gone. My legal folder was gone. Someone had requested a valuation of my property. A realtor had already walked through my rooms. Rachel was photographing them. David was measuring them. And my family had removed every visible sign that I had spent nearly 4 decades building a life there. They weren't preparing for my future. They were preparing my house for theirs. The next morning, David left early. Rachel took Emily shopping. I waited until their car disappeared around the corner. Then I walked into the small downstairs room David had claimed as his home office. I didn't touch the desk. I didn't open a drawer. Not yet. I simply stood in the doorway. On the corner of his desk sat a familiar gray folder. My gray folder. House legal documents. I felt the blood drain from my face. My son had taken it from my locked document box. And whatever he was planning, the proof might already be sitting inside that room. I stood in the doorway of David's office for nearly a minute before stepping inside. The gray folder was exactly where I had seen it. House legal documents. My handwriting. My folder. I closed the door behind me. There was a time when entering my son's room without permission would have felt like a violation. Even when David was 16, I knocked before going into his bedroom. But David had opened my mail. He had entered my bedroom. He had taken documents from a locked box. Whatever boundaries existed between us had already been broken. I picked up the folder. The first document was a photocopy of the deed. My name and Thomas's appeared exactly where I remembered them. Behind it were copies of property tax statements, insurance information, and an old mortgage satisfaction document. Then I found something I had never seen. Property transfer preparation. It wasn't a completed legal document. It looked like a draft assembled from a standard form. My address appeared at the top. David's name appeared below mine. I read slowly. The language described transferring an ownership interest in the property. My stomach tightened. There was no signature. Not yet. I turned the page. A yellow sticky note had been attached near the bottom. Need final legal review. I stared at those 4 words. This wasn't David casually researching estate planning. I was preparing paperwork. I continued through the folder. There were printed estimates of my home's value, comparable properties in my neighborhood, mortgage calculations, possible equity figures. Numbers had been circled in red ink. $438,000, $452,000, $465,000. My home had become a column of numbers to someone. The kitchen where I taught David to bake pancakes. The hallway where Thomas measured his height every birthday. The bedroom where I held my husband's hand during his final weeks. To David and Rachel, it appeared to have become approximately $450,000. Then I saw the sheet beneath the calculations. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. My name had been written repeatedly down the page. Martha Simmons. Martha Simmons. Martha Simmons. Again. 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 Some were too large. Some too narrow. Some looked nothing like my handwriting, but near the bottom they became disturbingly close. I sat down. The room seemed to tilt. I picked up the sheet with both hands. Someone had been practicing my signature. I compared it mentally with the signature I had used for decades. The long curve of the M. The way I connected the T to the H. The sharp upward stroke at the end of Simmons. Someone had studied those details. I wanted desperately to invent an innocent explanation. Maybe David had been testing a printer. Maybe Emily had copied my signature for some school project. Maybe no. There are moments in life when hope becomes another form of lying to yourself. I had spent days explaining away what was happening because the alternative was unbearable. My own son might be preparing to take my house. I took out my phone. My hands shook as I photographed every page. The deed, the transfer draft, the valuation documents, the signature sheet. I returned them in exactly the same order. Then I noticed something under the folder. A small notebook. I opened it. Most pages contained work notes, appointments, and phone numbers. One entry stopped me. M discussed transfer after trip. Another R says don't mention valuation yet. R Rachel. I photographed those pages too. Then I put everything back. I was halfway to the door when it opened. Emily stood there. We both froze. Her eyes went from me to the desk. Grandma? My heart pounded. I was looking for something. She closed the door behind her. You found Dad's papers. It wasn't a question. I stared at her. What do you know? Emily looked frightened. Not everything. Tell me what you do know. She hesitated. I softened my voice. Sweetheart, I will not blame you for anything your parents have done. Her eyes filled with tears. I knew they were talking about the house. I waited. A few weeks before you went to Aunt Helen's, Mom and Dad had a big argument. About what money? That surprised me. What kind of money I don't know. Dad kept saying they needed more time. Mom said they were running out. I thought about the property calculations. Did they mention selling this house? Emily shook her head. Not exactly. What did they say? She swallowed. Mom said, once it's in your name, everything gets easier. A cold pressure settled behind my ribs. And your father? He said you wouldn't just sign it over. What did Rachel say? Emily looked toward the door. Then she whispered, she said you would if they made you understand it was best for you. I closed my eyes. For years I had believed betrayal would announce itself loudly. A screaming argument, a slammed door, a cruel confession. But sometimes betrayal sounded like family members speaking softly in another room while deciding what was best for you. Grandma. I opened my eyes. Emily looked terrified. Please don't tell Dad I told you. I won't. She nodded toward the desk. Are they trying to take the house? I didn't want to put that burden on a 16-year-old. I don't know exactly what they're trying to do. But you think something's wrong? Yes. She wiped her cheek. Dad told Mom you'd never fight him. The words hurt more than the signature sheet. Not because they were threatening. Because I understood why David believed them. I had spent my entire life making things easier for him. When he wrecked his first car at 17, Thomas wanted him to work all summer to help replace it. I secretly paid part of the repair. When his first marriage ended, I let him live here for almost a year. When he struggled financially after Emily was born, I helped with daycare. I called it love. Maybe David had mistaken it for surrender. He said that I asked. Emily nodded. Mom asked what would happen if you got suspicious. Dad said, she won't fight me. She's my mother. I looked down at my hands. Something changed inside me then. Not my love for him. That remained painfully. But the part of me that had confused motherhood with endless permission finally began to break. I need you to do something for me, I said. Emily looked nervous. Don't spy on them. She seemed surprised. Don't search their things. Don't record conversations. Don't put yourself between me and your parents. But this is my problem to handle. She nodded reluctantly. And if they ask whether you saw me in here? Her face tightened. I can lie. No. I touched her cheek. I won't ask you to become dishonest to protect me. What should I say? Tell them to ask me. For the first time that morning, she smiled slightly. That sounds like something Grandpa would say. My throat tightened. Yes, it does. After Emily left, I returned upstairs. I locked my bedroom door. Then I took Thomas's Polaroid from my purse and placed it beside my phone. On the screen was the photograph I had taken of those practice signatures. My signature. My name. Copied over and over by someone who apparently believed that eventually the difference between my consent and an imitation of it might not matter. I looked at Thomas's message again. Remember who made this home possible? Until now, I had been asking what Thomas meant. That question suddenly felt incomplete. There was someone else who might know, someone standing in that photograph with us. Helen, Thomas's sister. She had been there when the picture was taken. She had known Thomas longer than anyone alive, and perhaps she knew why my husband had hidden a warning inside the walls of our home. I picked up my phone and called her. Helen answered on the third ring. Martha. Everything okay? Hey, I need to ask you about Thomas. Silence. Then she said softly, What about him? I found a photograph behind the fireplace. The line went completely quiet. Helen. When she finally spoke, her voice was trembling. You found it. My heart began pounding. You knew it was there. Another silence. Then I heard her take a breath. Martha, don't talk about this over the phone. Why come see me? Helen, bring the photograph. There was something in her voice I had never heard before. Fear. Then she said the words that made me grip the phone tighter. There are things about that house Thomas should have told you years ago. I drove to Helen's house the next morning with Thomas's photograph inside my purse. Helen lived about 40 minutes away in a small brick ranch on the outskirts of Columbus. Thomas used to tease her about the ceramic geese she kept near the porch. The geese were still there. For some reason, seeing them nearly made me cry. Helen opened the door before I knocked. At 69, she still had Thomas's eyes gray steady and almost impossible to lie to. You came alone? Yes. She looked toward my car. David doesn't know. No. Good. That word unsettled me. She led me into the kitchen and poured coffee. Neither of us drank. Show me. I removed the Polaroid. Helen took it carefully. The moment she saw the front, her expression softened. Oh, Tommy. Nobody except Helen had called my husband Tommy. She turned it over. When she read his message, tears filled her eyes. You knew about this, I said. I knew about the photograph. Did you know he hid it? She nodded. My chest tightened. For 30 years, no. Not that long. Helen placed the picture on the table. He showed it to me about 4 months before he died. I stared at her. Why didn't you tell me? Because he asked me not to. He was my husband. I know. Then why would he ask his sister to keep something like this from me? Helen folded her hands. Because Thomas was afraid you'd think he was turning you against David. The mention of my son changed the air between us. Tell me everything. Helen looked at the photograph again. Do you remember how close you came to losing the house? Of course. That period of our marriage was impossible to forget. Thomas had been laid off from the manufacturing plant. I was working full-time at the insurance office, but my salary barely covered groceries, utilities, and David's needs. For months, every bill felt like a threat. What you may not remember, Helen said, is how close Tommy was to giving up. I frowned. He never told me that. He told me. She leaned back. I was ashamed. He thought he'd failed you. My eyes burned. That sounds like Thomas. You were the one who saved the house, Martha. We saved it together. Helen shook her head. No, you did. I knew what she meant. My mother had died the previous year and left me a modest inheritance. It wasn't much by today's standards, but at the time it felt enormous. I had used almost all of it to catch up on the house. You used your inheritance, Helen said, and later you worked overtime for nearly 2 years. So did Thomas after he found another job. Yes. But without your money, this house would have been gone before that happened. I looked at the photograph. Young Martha was holding the keys. Suddenly, that detail seemed important. Was that why the picture was taken? Helen nodded. That was the day everything was finally secure again. Thomas asked me to come over and take a picture of you two. I studied my younger face. I remembered relief. I remembered Thomas cooking steaks even though we could barely afford them. I remembered David running through the yard. But I had forgotten Helen taking the photograph. Thomas kept saying, "This house is here because Martha refused to let us lose it." A tear slid down my cheek. I wiped it away. Then why hide the picture? Helen's expression changed. That came much later. I waited. After David started talking about inheritance, my stomach tightened. When after Thomas got sick, I stared at her. David had been attentive during his father's illness. He drove Thomas to appointments. He fixed things around the house. What did David say? Nothing terrible at first. He asked practical questions. What would happen to the house, whether you could afford to maintain it alone, whether Thomas had updated his will? That sounds reasonable. It did. Helen paused. Until it didn't. I said nothing. One afternoon, David and Thomas argued in the garage. I was here visiting. David said eventually the house would be his anyway, so it made sense to start planning. My heart sank. Those were almost the same words. My heart sank. Those were almost the same words David had recently said to me. Someday it belongs to me anyway. What did Thomas say? He told him there was a difference between inheritance and entitlement. I could almost hear my husband saying it. David got angry very. Helen continued quietly. Afterward, Thomas told me he was worried. Not because he thought David was evil. He thought David had started looking at the house as something already promised to him. I looked toward Helen's window. All those years I had thought Thomas's final months were occupied by doctors' medications and saying goodbye. Apparently he had been worrying about me too. He never told me. He wanted to protect your relationship with David. Helen reached across the table. You always defended that boy. He's my son. I know. There was no accusation in her voice. That made it hurt more. Thomas knew you'd give David almost anything if you believed he needed it. I thought of the practiced signatures. Almost anything was not everything. Before he died, Helen continued, he went to see an attorney. I looked sharply at her. What attorney? I don't remember all the details. He wouldn't tell me. Why, he said legal arrangements were private between you and him. But I never went to an attorney with Thomas. I know. The room seemed suddenly smaller. What arrangements? I don't know exactly. Helen, I swear. She squeezed my hand. But I know he wanted to make sure nobody could pressure you about this house. My heartbeat quickened. Did he change his will? I don't know. Did he create something? I don't know that either. Frustration rose inside me. Then what do you know? Helen looked hurt. I immediately regretted my tone. I'm sorry. No. You deserve answers. She stood and walked toward a cabinet. From a drawer, she removed an old envelope. Inside was a small receipt. She handed it to me. It bore the name of a Columbus law office, Bennett and Cole Estate Planning. The date was 5 months before Thomas died. Thomas left that at my house, Helen said. I kept it because I didn't know whether it mattered. I read it. Consultation fee. Thomas Simmons. My fingers trembled. Why hide the photograph behind the fireplace? Helen sat again. He said he wanted there to be something in the house that belonged only to you, something David wouldn't think to remove. The irony nearly broke me. David and Rachel had erased every visible photograph of me. Thomas had hidden the one they couldn't find. Then Helen said, But Martha, I don't think the photograph was what he was really protecting. I looked up. What do you mean? About 2 months before he died, Thomas asked me to come over while you were at work. I waited. I was working on the fireplace. A chill moved through me. He told me the mantel had come loose. Helen shook her head. It hadn't. My breathing slowed. What was he doing? I didn't know then. But he removed part of the trim and worked behind the bricks for almost an hour. Did you see what he put there? No. Was it the photograph? Not just the photograph. I stared at her. How do you know? Because the photograph was sitting on the coffee table while he worked. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The room filled with the ticking of Helen's kitchen clock. There was something else, yes. What I never saw it. I stood so quickly my chair scraped the floor. Helen looked up at me. Where exactly was he working? She closed her eyes, trying to remember. The left side of the fireplace, near the lower edge of the mantel. He removed a narrow piece of molding first, then loosened something behind it. The same area where I had found the photograph. I reached for my purse. Martha. I stopped. Helen's face was serious. Whatever Thomas hid, he hid it because he thought there might come a day when you needed protection. I thought of my missing deed, the property valuation, the realtor, the photographs, my signature written again and again on David's paper. Then I looked down at the young woman in the Polaroid. She had been 30 years younger, holding the keys to a house she had nearly exhausted herself saving. For days I had felt like an old woman being pushed toward the edges of her own home. But that woman in the photograph reminded me of something. I had fought for that house once, and I could fight for it again. I hugged Helen, then headed for the door. Before I reached it, she called my name. Martha. I turned. There's one more thing Thomas said that day. What? Helen's eyes filled again. He said, if Martha ever finds what I left there, tell her to go to the bank before she signs anything. I stopped breathing. The bank. Before I signed anything. My mind went immediately to the transfer document on David's desk. I left Helen's house knowing exactly where I was going next. Back to the fireplace. I drove home with Helen's words repeating in my head. Go to the bank before she signs anything. Thomas had said that 2 months before he died. At the time, David had already been asking questions about inheritance. Thomas had already been worried about what might happen after he was gone. And now, 3 years later, there was a transfer document sitting on my son's desk. When I turned onto my street, David's car was gone. Rachel's SUV wasn't in the driveway either. I parked inside the garage and went directly to the living room. The fireplace looked ordinary. That almost frightened me more. For 37 years I had decorated that mantel for Christmas. I had hung David's stocking from it when he was a child. Thomas and I had sat in front of it during winter storms. And all that time something might have been hidden inside it. I knelt beside the left edge. The piece of molding where I had found the Polaroid looked slightly uneven. I pressed it. Nothing. I tried again. Then I noticed a narrow seam lower down. I slid the tip of a butter knife into it. The molding shifted. My heart began pounding. Carefully I pulled. A narrow wooden strip came loose. Behind it was brick. For a moment, disappointment washed over me. Then I remembered Helen's words. He loosened something behind it. I ran my fingers along the bricks. One moved, barely. I pulled harder. The brick slid forward. Behind it was darkness. I reached inside. My fingertips touched something smooth. Metal number plastic. I pulled out a small, fire-resistant envelope yellowed with age, but still sealed. I sat on the floor. Thomas had hidden it. Not imagined. Not suspected. Hidden. My name was written across the front. Martha only. I opened it. Inside were 3 things. A folded letter, a receipt from Bennett and Cole estate planning, and a small brass key attached to a faded paper tag. The tag had a number written on it. I knew immediately what it was. A safe deposit box key. My hands began trembling. I unfolded Thomas's letter. Martha, if you are reading this, then I am probably no longer there to explain it myself. I stopped. His voice came alive in my head. I had read birthday cards from Thomas since his death. Old notes, grocery lists, even the ridiculous handwritten instructions he had taped to the lawnmower. But this was different. He had written these words knowing I might read them without him. I continued. I hope you never need what I left for you. But if someone is making you question whether this house is yours to control, please do not sign anything until you have opened the box this key belongs to. I covered my mouth. Thomas had known. Maybe not exactly what would happen, but he had known enough. The letter continued. You made this home possible when I could not. Never let anyone turn your generosity into an argument that you owe them what you built. There are papers in the bank that explain what I did and why. Take Helen with you if you need someone beside you. Trust yourself, Martha. You were always stronger than you knew. Love, Thomas. I pressed the letter against my chest. For 3 years I had wanted one more conversation with my husband. One more morning. One more cup of coffee. One more chance to ask whether I had done enough. And somehow, sitting on the floor beside that fireplace, Thomas had reached across 3 years of silence to tell me exactly what I needed to hear. Trust yourself. I cried then, quietly. Not only because I missed him, because my husband had trusted me more than I had trusted myself these past few days. I had allowed David and Rachel to make me wonder whether I was being unreasonable, old-fashioned, suspicious, difficult. Thomas had anticipated that. I wiped my face and examined the receipt. Bennett and Cole estate plan. It matched the one Helen had shown me, but this document contained more information. Safe Deposit Services, First Franklin Bank, Downtown Columbus Branch, Box 214. I closed my fingers around the key. Then I heard the garage door. My blood went cold. Someone was home. I quickly returned the brick to its position. The wooden molding took longer. I pressed it into place just as the kitchen door opened. Mom, David. I slipped the envelope beneath my sweater and stood. What are you doing? He appeared in the living room. His eyes went directly to the fireplace. I forced myself to remain calm. Cleaning. He looked at the floor. A little dust from the brick remained on the hardwood. You're cleaning the fireplace? Yes. In August I smiled. Dust doesn't check the calendar. He didn't smile. He walked toward me. My heart pounded so hard I was certain he could hear it. His gaze moved to the molding. Did you take this apart? Why would I do that? He crouched. His fingers touched the exact piece I had removed. The exact piece. I watched him. David pressed against it. Then he examined the brick behind it. His shoulders stiffened. You found something else. It wasn't a question. I folded my arms. Why would you think that? Because Dad used to hide things. Did he? David stood. Old receipts. Cash. Stuff like that. That sounds unlike your father. He stared at me. Did you find anything I thought of the letter against my skin? No. His eyes remained on mine. I wondered whether he could still recognize when I lied. Perhaps he could, because his expression changed. Mom, if Dad left something about the house, you should show me. Why? Because I'm your son. That isn't an answer. I'm trying to protect you. From what? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Then his frustration surfaced. Why are you suddenly treating me like I'm some stranger? The question hurt because part of me wanted to answer, because I don't recognize the man you've become. Instead, I said, I'm asking questions, David. That's all. About things you don't understand. That sentence cut through me. I understand more than you think. His eyes narrowed. For several seconds we stood facing each other. Then the front door opened. Rachel entered carrying shopping bags. She looked at David, then at me, then at the fireplace. What happened? Nothing, David said quickly. Rachel's gaze settled on the loosened molding. Her face changed. She knew. Maybe not what was hidden there, but she knew enough to understand that I was searching. I walked upstairs. Inside my bedroom, I locked the door and placed Thomas's envelope inside my purse. I planned to call Helen immediately. Before I could, there was a soft knock. Grandma Emily. I opened the door. She slipped inside. Dad is mad, I noticed. He and Mom are downstairs talking. About me? Emily nodded. I remembered my promise not to involve her. Don't listen at doors. I wasn't. They were in the kitchen. She hesitated. Dad said you found the hiding place. My skin prickled. The hiding place. That's what he called it. So David knew there had been something behind the fireplace. Maybe he didn't know exactly what, but he knew enough to be afraid. I sat beside Emily. Sweetheart, tomorrow I need to leave the house for a few hours. Okay. I don't want your parents knowing where I'm going. She looked worried. Is it dangerous? No. That much at least I believed. I just need privacy. Emily nodded. The following morning I woke at 6. I dressed quietly. Thomas's letter went into my purse. So did the key. When I reached the kitchen, I discovered my purse was there. My coat was there. My shoes were there. But my car keys were not. I checked the hook beside the door. Empty. My purse, my bedroom, the kitchen counter. Nothing. Then I heard footsteps behind me. David stood in the doorway, looking for something, my keys. He leaned against the frame. Maybe you misplaced them. I stared at him. I don't misplace my car keys. Everyone forgets things sometimes. There was something about the way he said it that frightened me more than anger would have. I reached into my purse. My fingers closed around the brass key to box 214. David might have taken away my car, but he had forgotten something. I still had a telephone, and I still had Helen. I kept my hand inside my purse wrapped around the little brass key. David stood in the kitchen doorway watching me. Maybe you misplaced them, he repeated. I looked at the empty hook beside the garage door. For 20 years, my car keys had hung there whenever I was home. You know where my keys are. His expression barely changed. Why would I know? Because yesterday they were hanging right there. Mom, you've had a lot on your mind. There was that tone again. Patient, gentle, almost concerned. It frightened me more than shouting would have. I turned toward him. Are you suggesting I'm becoming forgetful? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He sighed. This is exactly what I mean. Everything becomes a confrontation now. No, David. Everything becomes a confrontation when you refuse to answer a simple question. He walked to the coffee maker. I have work, and I have somewhere to go. Where, that isn't your concern. His hand stopped above his coffee mug. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he turned. Did you find something behind the fireplace? I stared at him. We already discussed that. No. You avoided the question, and now you're avoiding mine. His jaw tightened. Fine. Maybe I moved your keys. The admission came so casually that I almost couldn't believe it. Where are they? I don't remember. You don't remember. His eyes met mine. Funny how that works. There was nothing accidental about it. My own son was mocking the idea that I might be forgetful. I stepped closer. Give me my keys, not until we talk. About what? The house. At least the pretense was ending. I folded my arms. Go ahead. David glanced toward the staircase. I don't want to do this here. This is my kitchen. It seems like an appropriate place to discuss my house. Mom, no. You wanted to talk. Talk. Rachel appeared at the top of the stairs. She was already dressed. She came down slowly. What's happening? David looked at her. She found something behind the fireplace. Rachel stopped. I found an old photograph, I said. And something else, David replied. I looked at him. You seem very certain, because you've been acting differently. I almost laughed. You mean I've started asking questions? Rachel entered the kitchen. Martha, nobody is trying to upset you. Then where are my car keys? She looked at David. That was answer enough. I continued. Where is my deed? Rachel's face changed. David went completely still. I had not intended to reveal that I knew, but watching them confirmed everything. What are you talking about? He asked. The deed to this house was removed from my document box. Maybe Dad moved it years ago. Thomas has been dead 3 years. That doesn't mean my legal folder was on your desk. Silence. Rachel looked at him sharply. He hadn't told her I had found it. For the first time, I saw uncertainty between them. David recovered. I took it because I was organizing some estate paperwork. Without asking me, I was trying to help. By practicing my signature, his face lost its color. Rachel whispered, What interesting. Apparently, there were secrets inside their partnership, too. David's voice dropped. You went through my desk. You went through my locked document box. That isn't the same thing. It is when the documents belong to me. Rachel stepped between us. Everyone needs to calm down. I am calm. And I was. That surprised me. David looked more frightened by my calmness than he would have been by anger. He ran a hand through his hair. Mom, you're misunderstanding what you saw. Then explain it. The signature sheet was nothing. Then explain why my name was written 20 times. I was comparing signatures. For what? He didn't answer. I waited. Rachel folded her arms. Martha, this house is becoming too much for you. There it was again. You don't get to decide that. We live here too. Temporarily. Rachel's mouth tightened. We've been contributing. You buy groceries. We've done more than that. I didn't realize groceries purchased ownership. David slammed his hand against the counter. Enough. The sound echoed through the kitchen. Emily appeared halfway down the stairs. David saw her. His anger faltered. Go back upstairs, Emily. She didn't move. Now. Emily looked at me. I nodded gently. It's okay, sweetheart. She went back up. David lowered his voice. Do you understand how much pressure I'm under? No, because you haven't told me. I have a family. So do I. I have responsibilities. And somehow my house became responsible for solving them. His face hardened. This house is going to be mine someday anyway. The words hung between us. I remembered Helen telling me about Thomas's argument with David. The same belief. The same entitlement. I stepped closer to my son. Someday is not today. He looked away. Rachel didn't. She stared directly at me. You're sitting in a 4-bedroom house by yourself. I wasn't by myself until I invited you here. That's not what I mean. I know exactly what you mean. She exhaled sharply. You could be comfortable somewhere smaller. David could manage this property. Emily could stay in the same school district. Everybody benefits. Except me. You'd benefit too. By leaving my home, by not having to worry about it. I felt something inside me settle. They had repeated the idea so many times that perhaps they had begun believing it was kindness. You removed my photographs, I said. Rachel rolled her eyes. We redecorated. You removed photographs from my bedroom. She said nothing. You packed my albums away. You introduced me as someone staying with you. You brought a realtor through my house. You photographed the rooms. David requested a valuation. My deed disappeared. And now my car keys are gone because I was preparing to leave without telling you where. Neither answered. I looked at David. You don't want to help me manage my home. You want me to surrender it. His eyes hardened. That's not fair. No, it isn't. He misunderstood me. I wasn't talking about my accusation. I was talking about what he had done. David stepped closer. If Dad left papers about this house, I need to see them. No. I'm his son. And I was his wife. They may affect me. Then you'll learn about them when I decide they affect you. His face reddened. Give me whatever you found. No. It was only one word. But I had never spoken it to David quite that way. No explanation. No apology. No guilt. Just no. He stared at me as though I had become someone else. Maybe I had. Rachel spoke quietly. We need to have a family meeting. I almost smiled. A family meeting? Yes. All of us. We need to discuss what happens next. What happens next with my property is my decision. This affects everyone. Then everyone can hear my decision when I've made it. I walked toward the stairs. David called after me. Mom. I stopped. If you keep treating us like enemies eventually, that's what we're going to become. I turned around. No, David. You don't get to behave like my enemy and then blame me for noticing. His face changed. Pain. Anger. Perhaps shame. I went upstairs. Inside my bedroom, I locked the door and called Helen. She answered immediately. Did you find it? Yes. The key, yes. I can pick you up. I looked toward the driveway from my window. Not from the house. Why? David took my car keys. Helen went silent. Then her voice became firm. Where should I meet you? I thought quickly. There was a pharmacy about 6 blocks away. I'll walk to the CVS on Henderson Road. I'll be there. After hanging up, I put Thomas's letter, the bank key, the attorney receipt, and the Polaroid inside my purse. Then I heard voices outside my bedroom. David and Rachel. Their words were muffled. I couldn't make out everything. But I heard Rachel say, you should have checked behind all of it. Then David, I thought there was only the picture. My heart stopped. He knew about the photograph, but he had not known about the envelope. That meant Thomas had successfully hidden something from him for 3 years. And now I had it. I waited until the house became quiet. Then I went downstairs. My coat was still beside the door. I put it on. David appeared from the living room. Where are you going? For a walk. You don't usually take your purse on a walk. I looked at him. You've become very interested in my habits. He stepped toward me. Mom, we need to finish this conversation. No. You need to return my car keys. I told you I heard what you told me. I opened the front door. Cold morning air touched my face. For a second I remembered the young woman in Thomas's photograph standing in the same doorway decades earlier with a house key in her hand. I had been afraid then too, afraid of losing everything we had worked for. But I had survived that. I stepped outside. Behind me, David said, "We're having that family meeting tonight." I didn't turn around. Then make coffee. I walked toward the sidewalk. 6 blocks away, Helen would be waiting. And somewhere inside First Franklin Bank was box 214. Whatever Thomas had placed there, my son was afraid I would find it. That was exactly why I intended to open it. Helen was waiting in the pharmacy parking lot when I arrived. The 6-block walk had given me time to think, but not enough time to calm down. She unlocked the passenger door. "You all right?" My son took my car keys because he didn't want me leaving. Helen stared at me. He admitted it more or less. Her expression hardened. "Get in." We drove downtown mostly in silence. I kept touching my purse to reassure myself that the brass key was still there. First Franklin Bank occupied the ground floor of an old stone building. Thomas and I had banked there years ago before eventually moving our checking account closer to home. Inside, a bank employee named Patricia listened while I explained that my late husband had left me a safe deposit key. She examined my identification and typed my information into her computer. Then she frowned. "Mrs. Simmons, yes, box 214 is registered jointly." My heart dropped. "With whom?" "Thomas Simmons and Martha Simmons." I exhaled. For one terrible second, I had expected David's name. Patricia continued. "We'll need to verify the death certificate for Mr. Simmons. I have a copy." Thomas's envelope contained one. I handed it to her. After several more checks, signatures, and what felt like an hour, but was probably 15 minutes, Patricia led Helen and me downstairs. The safe deposit room was colder than the lobby. Rows of small metal doors lined the walls. Box 218 was near the bottom. Patricia inserted a bank key. I inserted Thomas's brass key beside it. Together we turned them. The lock clicked. She pulled out a long metal container and placed it on a private viewing table. "I'll give you some privacy." When she left, I stared at the box. Helen stood beside me. "You don't have to open it immediately." "Yes, I do." I lifted the lid. Inside were several envelopes and a thick blue folder. On top was another letter in Thomas's handwriting. Martha. I touched his name on the return corner before opening it. "My dear Martha, if you have reached this box, then something I feared may have happened. Please don't be frightened by the legal papers. I did not do anything to take control away from you. I did the opposite." I looked at Helen. She squeezed my shoulder. I continued. "Years ago, you saved our home with money. Your mother left you, and with more sacrifice than I ever properly thanked you for. When I became ill, I realized I needed to make sure no one, including our son, could ever treat this house as though your life in it were temporary." My vision blurred. I wiped my eyes and opened the blue folder. The first pages contained an estate plan prepared by Bennett and Cole. Then I found the trust documents. I wasn't a lawyer and the language was dense, but one fact became clear almost immediately. Thomas had placed his interest in the house into a trust arrangement designed to protect my right to live in and control the property for the rest of my life. I turned pages slowly. My name appeared repeatedly. Martha Simmons, primary beneficiary, current controlling beneficiary, right of occupancy, authority over sale, authority over transfer. I looked at Helen. "David can't sell it." She leaned closer. "Are you sure I think so?" I continued reading. David was listed as a future beneficiary. Future, not current. Whatever interest he might eventually receive did not give him authority over the property while I was alive. A laugh escaped me. Not because anything was funny, because for days I had felt as though David and Rachel were quietly pushing me toward the door of my own home. Yet Thomas had made certain that door remained legally mine to open or close. Then I reached a section marked Protective Provisions. I read it once, then again. Helen, what listen? I read the relevant language aloud as best I could. The provision stated that if a future beneficiary attempted to obtain an interest in trust property through coercion, fraudulent transfer forgery, or intentional misrepresentation against me, the trustee could reduce or eliminate that beneficiary's future interest. Helen sat down. Oh my God. I thought immediately of the signature sheet. Martha Simmons. Again, again, again. David wasn't merely trying to gain something early. If his actions could be proven, he might destroy his own future claim. There was another envelope beneath the trust. Inside were copies of correspondence between Thomas and the attorney. One sentence was underlined. My primary concern is that Martha must never feel obligated to surrender her home simply because David expects to inherit it later. I covered my mouth. Thomas had seen it. Years before I had. Not because he hated our son, because he understood him. Another letter explained that Thomas did not want David told the full protective provisions unless necessary. He hoped the trust would never become a weapon in the family. He wanted it to remain a shield. I thought of David standing in my kitchen. This house is going to be mine someday anyway. He had no idea how wrong those words might become. There's more, Helen said. At the bottom of the box was a sealed envelope addressed to the attorney. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. If Martha ever brings you evidence that someone is pressuring her about the house, please help her before confronting anyone. She will want to protect the family. Make sure she protects herself too. That broke me. I lowered my head and cried. Helen wrapped an arm around me. Thomas knew me. Even dying, he knew exactly what I would do. I would protect David, explain David, forgive David, perhaps even sacrifice myself to avoid losing David. And Thomas had tried to protect me from that instinct. After several minutes, I gathered the documents. I need copies. We'll make them, Helen said. And I need that attorney. I looked at the Bennett and Cole letterhead. The attorney's name was Samuel Cole. I put the original documents back into the safe deposit box, keeping only copies the bank helped me make. When we returned to Helen's car, I felt different, not victorious. There was nothing victorious about discovering your husband had prepared legal defenses against your own child. But I no longer felt powerless. I knew the house was protected. I knew David had no present authority over it, and I knew the papers on his desk could become evidence against him. Helen started the car. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. Don't confront him without talking to the attorney. I won't. She glanced at me. You promise? I promise. On the drive home, my phone rang. David. I let it ring. Then a text appeared. Where are you? Another followed. We need to talk before tonight. Then Mom, whatever Dad left you, you don't understand the whole situation. I stared at those words. Perhaps he was right. I didn't understand the whole situation, not yet. But I understood something David apparently didn't. The house he believed would inevitably become his was protected by a trust, and the very actions he was taking to claim it could cost him the inheritance he thought was guaranteed. I put my phone away. Thomas had not left me revenge. He had left me a choice. What happened next would depend on what my son chose to do when he realized his mother was no longer willing to surrender quietly. Helen dropped me at the end of my street instead of directly in front of the house. I had asked her to. I needed a few minutes before walking back inside. For days I had been trying to understand individual pieces of what David and Rachel were doing. The missing photographs, the realtor, the valuation, my missing deed, the practice signatures. Now as I walked toward the house, I had spent nearly 4 decades protecting those pieces finally began fitting together. And the picture they formed was uglier than I wanted to believe. My photographs had not disappeared because Rachel wanted lighter walls. They had disappeared because I was being erased from the story of my own home. When I entered, nobody was in the living room. I heard David and Rachel speaking upstairs. I went directly to my bedroom and locked the door. My car keys were sitting on the dresser. I stared at them. David had returned them. No apology, no explanation, just another attempt to make something unacceptable look ordinary again. I put the copies of Thomas's documents into an old sewing basket beneath several unfinished pieces of fabric. Then I called Bennett and Cole. To my surprise, Samuel Cole still practiced there. His assistant scheduled me for the following morning after I explained that I was Thomas Simmons's widow. Before hanging up, she said, "Mr. Cole remembers your husband." That sentence gave me more comfort than I expected. That evening, David's promised family meeting never happened. Instead, he and Rachel stayed upstairs. The silence felt strategic. At dinner, Rachel barely looked at me. Emily watched everyone carefully. I didn't mention the bank. David didn't ask again. After dinner, I went to the basement. I wanted to find my photograph albums. Rachel had said they were stored safely there. The basement had become crowded since they moved in. Boxes lined one wall. David's exercise equipment occupied another. I searched until I found 3 plastic storage bins marked family room. Inside the first were my framed photographs, dozens of them. I lifted out the silver frame that had once sat beside Thomas's chair. There we were on our 25th anniversary. I touched his face. The second bin contained albums. The third held decorative items that had belonged to me. Nothing had been thrown away. That should have comforted me. Instead, it confirmed something. They hadn't removed random old things. They had systematically removed me. I carried one album upstairs. David was in the kitchen. He saw it immediately. "Where did you get that? The basement? I thought we agreed we'd reorganize later." "We didn't agree to anything." He looked tired. "Mom, please." I sat at the table and opened the album. The first page showed David at 5 years old sitting on Thomas's shoulders while I stood beside them. "Do you know what bothers me most?" I asked. He remained silent. "You didn't remove old photographs because they were outdated." I turned another page. "You removed photographs that showed this was my life before you moved back here." "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" I looked toward the walls. "Rachel photographs rooms without me in them. A realtor walks through. You request a valuation. Then you tell people you're preparing the property for transfer." His expression changed. "You called the valuation company?" "Yes." He pulled out a chair. "Mom, you don't understand what we were trying to do." "Then explain." He rubbed his forehead. "We were trying to create options." "For whom?" "For everyone." There was that word again. Everyone. A word that somehow meant David, Rachel, and Emily. Never me. "Were you planning to list the house number borrow against it?" He hesitated. That hesitation was enough. "Were you?" "We were exploring possibilities. With property you don't own. You're making it sound criminal. I haven't called it anything yet." His eyes narrowed. "What did Dad leave you?" I closed the album. "Why are you so worried because he made decisions when he was sick? He was dying, David. He wasn't incompetent." "I didn't say he was." "You keep suggesting everyone around you is confused except you." He stood. "This isn't going anywhere." "No, it isn't." I carried the album upstairs. Later that night, Emily knocked on my door. She entered holding her phone. "Grandma, I think I know why Mom took all those pictures down." My heartbeat quickened. "What do you mean?" She sat beside me. "A few weeks ago, she was taking pictures for someone." "I know." "No. I mean she was sending them. To whom I don't know." Emily opened a family group message. She showed me several photographs Rachel had sent to David while he was at work. The living room, dining room, front porch, bedrooms. The captions were brief. "This angle looks better. Remove Martha's frames first. Need cleaner walls." One message from David read, "Good. Makes it look less temporary." I read that sentence twice. Less temporary. Their presence. Not mine. Emily scrolled further. Another message appeared. "Once everything is under David, we can show long-term occupancy and improvements." My stomach turned. "They thought I didn't understand what they meant," Emily said. I handed back the phone. Suddenly the photographs made perfect sense. Rachel wasn't merely changing decor, she was creating a visual history, one where David and his family appeared established in the house, one where I looked increasingly absent. Perhaps it would not legally prove ownership by itself, but it supported the story they intended to tell. David lived here. David maintained the property. David managed his aging mother. And Martha was becoming forgetful. Martha couldn't manage the house. Martha was preparing to move somewhere smaller. The thought made my skin crawl. "There's something else," Emily whispered. I looked at her. She hesitated. "I know you told me not to spy." "Emily, I didn't." Her voice became defensive. "I swear. I was doing homework in the dining room last week. Mom and Dad were in the kitchen. They knew I was there, but I had headphones on. What happened, I wasn't actually listening to music." Despite everything, I almost smiled. "Go on." "They were talking about you signing something." My chest tightened. "Do you remember what?" "No." She looked frightened. "But Mom said if you started asking questions, Dad should tell people you'd been forgetting things." The room went silent. I thought of my car keys. Maybe you misplaced them. Everyone forgets things sometimes. That had not been a cruel joke. It had been rehearsal. "Did your father agree?" Emily looked down. "He said he didn't like it." Relief tried to enter my chest. Then she continued. "But Mom said, if she refuses, what choice do we have?" And he said nothing. Sometimes silence is an answer. I stood and walked toward the window. My son had not invented Rachel's idea, but he had not stopped it either. He was willing to let people question my competence if that helped him gain control of the house. That realization hurt worse than discovering the signature sheet. Then Emily said something I hadn't expected. I recorded part of it. I turned. "You what I didn't plan to." She held up her phone. "I was recording a voice memo for a school presentation. When they started arguing, I forgot it was still running." "Emily, I don't want you involved in this. I already am." Her eyes filled with tears. "They're my parents. You're my grandma. I live in this house too. Everybody keeps pretending nothing is happening." She unlocked the phone. I listened to it afterward. My heart pounded. "What does it say?" She looked at me. "Dad says something about you signing the transfer." I sat down again. Emily pressed the screen but didn't start the recording yet. "There's more." "What?" Her voice dropped. "Mom says, once it's done, she can't undo it." A chill traveled through me. Tomorrow morning I would meet Samuel Cole. I had Thomas's trust documents. I had photographs of the papers from David's office. And now, completely by accident, my 16-year-old granddaughter might have captured the one thing David and Rachel could not explain away: their own voices. I did not let Emily play the recording that night. Not because I didn't want to hear it, because I was afraid of what hearing my son's voice might do to me. "Send me a copy," I told her. She did. Then I made her promise not to confront either of her parents. "This is between the adults now." "But Grandma, you've already done enough." She looked guilty. "I didn't mean to record them. I know." I touched her hand. "And none of this is your responsibility." After Emily left, I stared at the audio file on my phone. 27 minutes. I finally pressed play. For the first several minutes, there was only distant conversation mixed with the sounds of Emily moving papers. Then Rachel's voice became clear. "We don't have another 6 months," David answered. "I know. You keep saying that. What do you want me to do, Rachel?" "I want you to finish what we started." My stomach tightened. There was a pause. Then David said, "She won't sign if she thinks she's giving up the house." Rachel responded immediately. "Then stop explaining it that way." I closed my eyes. David's voice came again. "I told you I'm not lying to her." Rachel laughed bitterly. "You already told the valuation company you're handling the transfer. That's different." "How?" No answer. Then Rachel said the words Emily had remembered. "Once it's done, she can't undo it." David lowered his voice. "Don't say things like that." "Why? Because it sounds bad? Because it is bad." For one brief second, hope rose inside me. My son knew. He knew what they were doing was wrong. Then Rachel said, "So what's your solution?" "Lose everything." Silence. David finally answered, "No." That single word changed everything. Not because I understood what everything meant, because whatever pressure David was under, he had chosen to solve it using me. The recording continued. Rachel mentioned payments, deadlines, an account I didn't recognize. Then David said something about the investment. I stopped the recording. Investment. The next morning, I drove myself to Bennett and Cole. Samuel Cole was in his early 70s with white hair and a calm voice. When I told him who I was, his expression softened. Thomas spoke about you often. I wish he'd spoken to me about you. Samuel smiled sadly. He was trying to spare you worry. I handed him copies of the trust documents. Then I showed him photographs from David's office. His expression changed when he reached the signature sheet. Did you authorize any transfer? Num. Did you ask your son to prepare these documents? Num. Did you give him permission to request a valuation? Num. Samuel placed the photographs down. Then don't sign anything. I wasn't planning to. Good. I showed him Emily's recording. He listened through headphones. When he finished, he removed them slowly. Martha, your husband, was very specific about protecting your control of this property. I understand that now. David has no authority to transfer the house. And the protective clause. Samuel nodded. If evidence establishes attempted coercion, fraudulent transfer forgery, or intentional misrepresentation, David could jeopardize his future interest. The words felt terrible, even though I already knew them. I don't want to punish my son. This isn't about punishment. Samuel leaned forward. It's about stopping conduct that should never have begun. I looked down. He's in trouble financially. Do you know how much? No. Samuel advised me to preserve everything and make no commitments. He also suggested I avoid telling David exactly what was in the trust until we understood what he and Rachel had done. When I left his office, I sat in my car and played the recording again. This time I listened past the point where I had stopped. Rachel's voice. The investment was supposed to cover the loan. David replied. You said it was safe. You agreed. I agreed because you showed me projections. You signed too, David. There was a long silence. Then David said, How much do we actually owe? Rachel's answer was quieter. Enough that we can't fix it without the house. I paused the recording. There it was. The reason. Not inheritance planning. Not concern about stairs. Not my age. Debt. I drove home feeling sick. That afternoon I waited until David returned from work. Rachel was out. Emily was upstairs. David found me sitting at the kitchen table. We're still having that meeting, he said. Tomorrow. He looked surprised. Why tomorrow? Because I want everyone prepared. For what a truthful conversation. His eyes narrowed. I gestured toward the chair. Sit down. He hesitated, then sat. Are you in financial trouble? His face changed instantly. Why answer me? We have expenses. Everybody has expenses. He looked away. Did you make an investment? Silence. I had my answer. How much did you lose? Mom, how much? It isn't that simple. It rarely is. He stood. This is between Rachel and me. It stopped being between you and Rachel when you decided my house would solve it. His face hardened. You don't understand what happened. Then help me understand. For a moment I thought he might. His shoulders dropped. He suddenly looked like the boy who used to come home after doing something wrong and stand in the kitchen waiting for me to notice. We put money into a development project, he said. How much? A lot. Your savings. Yes. All of them. He didn't answer. David. We borrowed too. My chest tightened. How much? He shook his head. I can't. You can ask me to surrender my home, but you can't tell me the size of the hole you're trying to fill with it. That isn't fair. Stop saying that. My voice rose for the first time. Fair would have been coming to me and saying, Mom, I made a terrible mistake. Fair would have been asking for advice. Fair would have been accepting that I might say no. He stared at the floor. Instead, he had taken my papers, opened my mail, allowed Rachel to erase me from my walls. What happened to the investment? It collapsed. When months ago, before they moved in. I suddenly understood. You didn't move here to save for another house. David said nothing. You moved here because you couldn't afford where you were living. His silence confirmed it. And you lied to me. We needed somewhere for Emily. I would have helped you. I know. Then why lie? He finally looked at me. Because I was ashamed. That answer hurt because I believed it. But shame did not explain everything. Did Rachel practice my signature? His face went blank. I don't know. Did you know? Then who did I said I don't know? I stood. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock, family meeting. I walked toward the stairs. Mom. I stopped. I never wanted to hurt you. I turned. You just wanted what belonged to me badly enough to accept hurting me. He had no answer. Upstairs, I entered my bedroom and closed the door. Then I called Samuel Cole. Mr. Cole, tomorrow night my son wants a family meeting. I see. I want the truth on the table. Are you certain? Yes. I looked at Thomas's Polaroid beside me, but I don't want to do it alone. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You won't have to. At 6:55 the next evening, I carried a manila folder into the dining room and placed it in front of my chair. Rachel had already arranged the table, not for dinner, for negotiation. A stack of papers sat beside her laptop. David had a yellow legal pad and 2 pens in front of him. They had prepared. So had I. Emily hovered near the doorway. You don't have to stay for this, I told her. Rachel answered before she could. She absolutely does not need to be involved. Emily looked at her mother. I already am. Rachel's face tightened. I touched Emily's arm. Go upstairs for now, sweetheart. She hesitated, then obeyed. David looked at the clock. David looked at me. I stood and opened the door. Samuel Cole entered carrying a leather briefcase. Helen was beside him. David's face went pale. Rachel stood immediately. Who is this? Samuel extended his hand. Samuel Cole. I represented Thomas Simmons in his estate planning. David did not shake it. Instead, he looked at me. You hired a lawyer, your father did. That silenced him. Helen sat beside me. Samuel took the chair at the end of the table. Rachel remained standing. This was supposed to be a family meeting. It still is, I said. Mr. Cole is here because this family has been discussing legal ownership of my house. David looked down. Rachel slowly sat. I opened my folder. Before either of you explains what is best for me, I would like to show you something. I placed the Polaroid on the table. David stared at it. Rachel looked irritated. This again, yes. This again. I turned it over. Your father wrote this to me. I read the message aloud. If they ever make you feel like you don't belong here, remember who made this home possible. I placed Thomas's letter beside it. Thomas hid more than a photograph. David's head lifted. I continued. He left instructions. Rachel looked at David. That small glance told me she had not known about the envelope either. Samuel opened his briefcase. He removed copies of the trust documents. David stared at them. What is that? The estate plan your father created before he died. I saw his will. Samuel answered calmly. This is separate. Rachel leaned forward. What does it say? I looked at David. It says this house is mine to control for the rest of my life. His face hardened. I never said it wasn't. Yes, you did. Every time you acted as though your future inheritance gave you authority today. Samuel continued. Mr. Simmons established protections, specifically ensuring that Mrs. Simmons retains control over the property. Rachel's eyes moved quickly across the papers. What happens after she dies? The question was so immediate that even David turned toward her. Samuel did not react. Future distribution isn't the issue tonight. I reached into my folder again. This is. I placed a photograph of the property transfer draft on the table. David's shoulders stiffened. Then came the property valuation. Then the photograph of his notebook. M discussed transfer after trip. R says don't mention valuation yet. Finally, I placed the photograph of the signature sheet in front of him. My name repeated across the page. Rachel stared at it. Her face changed. David noticed. So did I. He picked it up. What the hell is this? I studied him carefully. It was on your desk. I've never seen this. Rachel said nothing. David turned toward her. She crossed her arms. You had papers everywhere. Did you write these? Why does that matter? Nothing was signed. David pushed his chair back slightly. You practiced my mother's signature. I was testing whether the form could be completed if we needed it. The room became silent. I felt Helen's hand close around mine beneath the table. David stared at his wife. If we needed it, Rachel looked irritated rather than ashamed. Don't act shocked. We talked about getting the transfer done. We talked about convincing her. The words escaped him before he could stop them. I felt something inside me crack. David looked at me. Mom, no. Keep going. He lowered his head. Rachel turned toward me. You're making this sound much worse than it was. I almost admired the certainty with which she said it. You removed my photographs. We were updating the house. You photographed rooms after removing them. No response. You told people I was staying with you. That was a mistake. You discussed telling people I was forgetful if I resisted. Rachel's face changed. David looked at me sharply. How do you know that I took out my phone? Because sometimes people should be careful what they say around a teenager doing homework. Rachel went pale. I pressed play. Her voice filled the dining room. We don't have another 6 months. Then David's. I know. We listened. Nobody moved. When the recording reached the words, once it's done, she can't undo it, Rachel looked toward the stairs. You recorded us. Emily didn't deliberately record you, I said. A school voice memo was already running. Rachel stood. This is unbelievable. No, I said. What's unbelievable is that my granddaughter accidentally captured her parents discussing how to take control of her grandmother's home. David looked sick. Samuel remained composed. Then the recording reached the investment. The loan. The debt. I stopped it. David covered his face. Rachel stared at the table. Samuel spoke. Mr. Simmons, you should understand something about your father's trust. David slowly lowered his hands. What the trust contains protective provisions. Samuel explained them. Coercion, fraudulent transfer, forgery, intentional misrepresentation. Each word seemed to drain more color from David's face. If such conduct is established, Samuel concluded, your future interest can be reduced or eliminated. David stared at him. You mean I could lose the house, I answered. You mean you could lose something that was never yours yet? He looked at me. For the first time I saw genuine fear. Not fear of debt, fear of consequences. Rachel leaned forward. Nothing happened. Martha still owns the house. Samuel looked at her. An unsuccessful attempt does not automatically make the underlying conduct irrelevant. Rachel's confidence faltered. David picked up the signature sheet again. He stared at it. Then he turned to his wife. I agreed to talk Mom into transferring the house. His voice was shaking. I agreed to the valuation. I agreed to the pictures. I even agreed we could use the equity to fix the debt. Every admission hurt. Then he held up the signature sheet. But I never agreed to this. Rachel's face hardened. Oh, please. You told me she would sign. I thought she would. You said you had another way if she didn't. My eyes moved between them. Rachel went completely still. David stared at her. What did you mean? She said nothing. Rachel. Her silence changed something in his face. He suddenly looked less angry than frightened. How much do we actually owe? She looked away. You know how much? No. He shook his head. I know what you told me. Rachel's hands tightened. David stood. How much? Sit down. How much, Rachel? Her eyes filled with anger. More than I told you. David stopped moving. The room seemed to contract around us. How much more? Rachel said nothing. David looked towards her laptop, then toward the financial papers she had brought to the meeting. He reached for them. Rachel grabbed the stack first. That movement told us everything. David stared at her. What else haven't you told me? For the first time since this began, I realized the betrayal inside my house was larger than I had understood. David had betrayed me. That truth remained. But somewhere along the way, Rachel had also begun deceiving him. And judging by the terror on her face, the forged signatures were not the only part of her plan my son had never known. Rachel kept one hand pressed against the stack of financial papers. David stood across from her. How much more? He asked again. She looked toward Samuel. I don't think we should discuss private financial information in front of Martha's attorney. David laughed once. There was no humor in it. You were willing to discuss my mother's house without her permission, but now you're concerned about privacy, David. How much Rachel finally released the papers. He pulled them toward himself. I watched his face as he read. Confusion came first, then disbelief, then something close to panic. This can't be right. Rachel said nothing. David flipped to another page. Rachel, this says 87,000. My stomach tightened. He kept reading. And this credit line. You told me that was paid off. I was going to. When the development paid, the development failed. I know that. David turned another page. His face became pale. How much altogether? Rachel looked down. About 140,000. David stared at her. You told me 70. I was trying to fix it. With my mother's house with equity we could repay. I finally spoke. Equity you did not own. Rachel turned toward me. I know how it sounds. No, I said quietly. I don't think you do. David held up the signature sheet. And this was this part of fixing it. Rachel's eyes hardened. I told you. Nothing was filed. That isn't what I asked. I was exploring possibilities. I almost laughed. That was the same phrase David had used. Perhaps dishonesty had its own family vocabulary. David stepped away from the table. You told me Mom would eventually agree. I believed she would. And if she didn't, Rachel didn't answer. David pointed at the page. This was your backup plan. It wasn't a plan. You practiced her signature 20 times. I wanted to see whether you could forge it? Her chair scraped backward as she stood. Stop making me the villain when you were part of this. The words struck their target. David went silent. Rachel turned toward me. He knew we needed the house. David shook his head. I knew we were going to ask Mom to transfer it. You knew more than that. I knew about the valuation. And the realtor. Yes. And removing the photographs. His face tightened. Yes. Each admission was a knife. Rachel looked almost triumphant. See, I looked at my son. Why the photographs? David couldn't meet my eyes. Rachel thought the house needed to look established as ours. The honesty hurt worse than another lie. For whom? Lenders, maybe an appraiser, anyone we might need to show improvements or long-term occupancy. Samuel spoke calmly. Occupancy does not establish ownership. I know that now. I looked at David. You knew it then. He closed his eyes. Yes. The room went quiet. That one word mattered. David could no longer pretend he had simply been manipulated. Rachel may have gone further, but my son had willingly walked much of the road beside her. You let her remove me from my own walls. He looked at me. I told myself they were just pictures. They were never just pictures. I know. No. You know now because you got caught. His face crumpled slightly. I continued. You allowed Rachel to introduce me as though I were staying in your house. I should have stopped her. You opened my mail. Yes. You took my documents. Yes. You requested a valuation. Yes. You took my car keys. His voice became almost inaudible. Yes. I swallowed the pain rising in my throat. And you were willing to tell people I was becoming forgetful. David looked at Rachel, then back at me. I didn't want to do that. But you didn't say no. He lowered his head. No. I nodded. Then don't stand there and pretend Rachel did this alone. Rachel folded her arms. Thank you. I turned toward her. That wasn't a defense of you. Her expression hardened. You took his fear and turned it into permission. I was protecting my family. So was I for 40 years. She opened her mouth. I raised my hand. And not once did protecting my family require stealing someone else's future. Samuel remained silent. This wasn't a legal conversation anymore. It was a reckoning. David sat down. How did it get this far? Rachel stared at him. You want the truth? Yes. You panicked. He looked confused. When the investment collapsed, you couldn't sleep. You couldn't tell your mother because you were ashamed. You kept saying you had failed Emily. David said nothing. So I found a solution. My mother's house. A house you are going to inherit. Someday. The word sounded different when he said it now. Smaller. Ashamed. Rachel pointed toward the trust documents. And apparently, not even that anymore. David looked at Samuel. Have I already lost my interest? Samuel answered carefully. That is not something I'm determining at this table tonight. The relevant facts must be documented and evaluated under the trust. David nodded slowly. Then he looked at me. I deserve whatever happens. Rachel turned sharply. Don't be ridiculous. He looked at her. No, I'm done pretending. Something shifted in him. Not redemption, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of honesty. I agreed to pressure Mom, he said. I agreed to make the house look like ours. I agreed to talk her into transferring control because I thought I could borrow against it and fix everything before she ever suffered. I stared at him. You thought stealing from me was acceptable if you returned it before I noticed his eyes filled. When you say it that way, there is no other way to say it. He nodded. You're right. Rachel scoffed. This is pathetic. David looked at her. What, we're losing everything and you're apologizing? We were already losing everything. No, we had a way out. You mean forging my mother's signature? I told you that wasn't finalized. He stared at her. Then something seemed to occur to him. You said you had a contingency. Rachel became still. What? 2 weeks ago. You said if Mom refused, there was another way to access the equity. She looked toward Samuel. David stepped closer. What exactly were you planning? Nothing. Rachel. I said nothing. Then why were you practicing the signature? Her face tightened. Because I was desperate. The words exploded from her. Everyone froze. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained angry. I was watching notices arrive every week. I was watching our accounts disappear. I was watching you pretend everything would somehow work itself out. So you were going to forge it. I don't know what I would have done. David stared at her. That was as close to an admission as we were going to get. Then he looked at the financial papers again. There's something else. Rachel shook her head. Stop. You said the debt was 140. It is. Then why does this statement show another loan? She reached for the paper. David pulled it away. Whose account is this? Rachel said nothing. He read more carefully. Then his face changed. This isn't joint. No. You took this loan yourself. Yes. And you used our house as security. Rachel's voice dropped. The remaining equity. David sat down heavily. He looked devastated. Their own home or whatever property they had owned before moving in had not merely become unaffordable. Rachel had leveraged what remained without telling him the full extent. Suddenly I understood why she had been so desperate to reach mine. David covered his face. For a long moment nobody spoke. Then I stood. I think this meeting is over. Rachel looked up. What happens now? I looked around the room. At the walls where my photographs had once hung. At my son broken by consequences he had helped create. At the woman who had crossed a line desperation could explain, but never excuse. You both leave my house. Rachel's eyes widened. Tonight you can take what you need tonight. Arrange the rest with me later. Where are we supposed to go? I looked directly at her. For months you've been deciding where I should live without asking me. Her face went pale. Now you can make that decision for yourself. David didn't argue. He simply nodded. Then he looked toward the staircase. What about Emily? My anger softened. She is my granddaughter. She will always have a place here. David wiped his eyes. I walked toward the fireplace. For the first time since returning from Indianapolis, I understood what Thomas had really protected. Not bricks. Not money. Not an inheritance. Choice. My choice. And that night, however much it hurt, I finally used it. The house was almost silent by midnight. David packed without arguing. Rachel did not. She moved through the upstairs rooms, opening drawers, closing suitcases, and muttering about how impossible I was making everything. I stayed downstairs with Helen. Samuel had left after making sure I understood what I needed to do next. Document everything. Protect the original papers. Do not sign anything. Do not allow guilt to replace judgment. Simple instructions, much harder to follow when the person who betrayed you was the child you once carried to bed after he fell asleep on the sofa. Around 11, Emily came downstairs carrying a backpack. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "Grandma," I stood immediately. She walked into my arms. "I'm sorry." Those words broke something in me. I held her tighter. "You have absolutely nothing to apologize for. But they're my parents, and you are not responsible for their choices." She buried her face against my shoulder. "I don't want everybody to hate each other." I closed my eyes. Neither did I. That was the tragedy. People imagine boundaries come from hatred. Sometimes they come from love that has finally understood it cannot survive without protection. "You don't have to choose sides," I whispered. She pulled away. "Can I still come here? This will always be your grandmother's house." Her mouth trembled. "Even after everything. Especially after everything." David appeared at the bottom of the stairs carrying 2 suitcases. He had heard me. Our eyes met. "I'll make sure she sees you," he said. I nodded. Rachel came down several minutes later. She looked at me but said nothing. At the front door she finally turned. "I hope you're happy." David closed his eyes. "Rachel, don't." "No, she should hear it. We're going to a hotel while she sits in this enormous house alone." I looked at her. "I was sitting in this enormous house alone before you arrived. You know what I mean." "Yes, I do." I opened the door. "You believe my comfort should have been sacrificed to protect you from the consequences of your decisions." Rachel's face hardened. "I was trying to protect my daughter. So was I when David was young. I did it by working overtime, paying bills, and going without things I wanted. I didn't do it by taking someone else's home." She had no answer. David carried the suitcases outside. Emily hugged me again. Then Rachel left. David remained on the porch. For a moment he looked 42 and 12 at the same time. "Mom." I waited. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "Good." He flinched. I hated that it hurt him, but I refused to soften the truth merely because the truth had finally reached him. "I need time, David." "I know. And you need to understand that Rachel going further than you expected does not erase what you did." "I know. You helped remove my photographs." "Yes." "You lied to me." "Yes." "You took my documents." He lowered his eyes. "Yes." "You tried to pressure me into giving you control over my home." His voice cracked. "Yes." I nodded. "Then start there." He looked confused. "With what?" "With the truth." I closed the door gently, not angrily. That mattered to me. The following morning I called a locksmith. By noon every exterior lock had been changed. When the locksmith handed me the new key, I stood in the entryway staring at them. 37 years earlier, I had stood in almost the same place holding another set of keys. Thomas beside me. Helen taking a photograph. Life has strange circles. That afternoon, I met Samuel at his office. We documented the valuation request, the transfer draft, the photographs of the signature practice sheet, David's notebook entries, and Emily's accidental recording. Samuel arranged for formal copies to be preserved with the trust records. "What happens to David's inheritance?" I asked. "That does not have to be decided today." I appreciated that answer. I wasn't ready to decide. Justice and revenge can look similar when you're angry. I wanted time to know which one I was choosing. When I returned home, the silence felt different. Not empty. Mine. I went downstairs to the basement. The plastic bins were exactly where I had left them. I carried them upstairs one at a time. Then I spent the afternoon unpacking my life. There was my mother holding David as a baby, Thomas standing beside our first used station wagon, David in a ridiculous red bow tie at his high school graduation, Emily asleep on my chest when she was 3 months old. Some photographs made me smile. Others made me cry. I realized something while sitting among those frames. I did not want to put everything back exactly as it had been. That version of the house belonged to a Martha who believed keeping peace was more important than protecting herself. I loved her. but I didn't want to become her again, so I chose carefully. Thomas and me on our wedding day went on the mantel. My mother, holding David, went into the hallway. Emily's kindergarten photograph returned to the bookshelf. Then I found a picture I had almost forgotten. It was taken on my 65th birthday. I was standing alone in the backyard beneath the maple tree. My hair was silver. My smile was wide. Thomas had already been gone a year. I remembered that day. It was the first birthday after his death when I had genuinely laughed. I held the frame for a long time. Then I placed it on the table beside the front door. The first photograph anyone would see when entering my house was me. Not because I wanted to erase anyone else, because I would never again participate in my own disappearance. Late that afternoon, Helen arrived with dinner. She stopped in the entryway. Her eyes landed on my photograph. "Well," she said, smiling, "there you are." I laughed. Yes. There I was. We ate in the kitchen. Afterward, Helen helped me restore several more pictures. We deliberately left empty spaces on the walls. "New memories," she said. "I like that." As evening settled over the house, I stood before the fireplace. Thomas's Polaroid remained upstairs in my bedroom. I had considered framing it. Instead, I held it in my hands and read his message once more. "If they ever make you feel like you don't belong here, remember who made this home possible." I finally understood. Thomas had not been talking only about money. A home is made by the person who stays awake with a sick child at 2 in the morning. The person who stretches $20 until payday. The person who paints the kitchen, plants the tree, hosts Thanksgiving, survives funerals, forgives mistakes, and keeps the lights on when everyone else feels lost. I had done those things. I belonged here. My phone buzzed. A message from David. I opened it. "I found a short-term apartment. Emily is okay. I contacted a financial counselor today. I'm not asking you for anything. I just wanted you to know." I read it twice. Then I put the phone down. I did not answer. Not yet. Healing should never be rushed, simply because the person who hurt you has finally become uncomfortable with the distance. I returned to the fireplace. There was one photograph I had not placed on any wall. The hidden Polaroid. I ran my thumb across its worn edge. Thomas had hidden it to remind me who I was. Perhaps someday it would serve another purpose. I looked toward the empty space behind the loosened brick. And for the first time, I began thinking about what I might leave there for Emily. Winter came early to Columbus that year. By the first week of December, snow had already settled along the edges of my driveway, and the maple tree outside the living room stood bare against a pale gray sky. 4 months had passed since David and Rachel left my house. A great deal had changed. Some things had not. David and Rachel separated 6 weeks after moving out. I learned about it from David, not Emily. He called one Sunday afternoon and asked whether he could come by. I almost said no. Then I remembered something Samuel had told me. Boundaries were not walls unless I wanted them to be. They could also be doors that opened only when I decided it was safe, so I said yes. David arrived alone. He looked older, not dramatically. There were simply new lines around his eyes and none of the confidence he used to wear, like a well-ironed shirt. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, David slid an envelope toward me. "What is this, a letter? You're sitting 3 feet away." "I know." His voice cracked slightly. "There are things I can't say without trying to explain them." I understood. Explanations had always been his refuge. So I accepted the letter. He did not ask me to read it while he was there. Instead, he told me he had started working with a financial counselor. He had sold his expensive SUV. He had taken extra consulting work on weekends. He was negotiating repayment plans with creditors. Most importantly, he said he was no longer treating my house as the solution. "What about Rachel?" I asked. "She has an attorney handling her debts separately. And the marriage." David stared into his coffee. "I don't know if there's anything left to save." I felt no satisfaction. Rachel had done terrible things, but the destruction of a marriage was not a victory. "What about Emily?" "She's angry with both of us. That may take time." "I know." Then David looked around the kitchen. His eyes landed on the photographs I had restored. I was wrong about those. I waited. When Rachel suggested taking them down, I knew it would hurt you. My chest tightened. Then why did you agree? Because every time I saw them, they reminded me this wasn't mine. The honesty stunned me. He looked ashamed, and I needed to pretend it was. For the first time, I understood the photographs from his perspective. They had been evidence. Every image of Thomas and me had contradicted the story David needed to tell himself. That he had a right to the house, that taking control early was only practical, that I was standing between him and something already his. You erased me because you needed to erase your guilt, I said. His eyes filled. Yes. There was nothing else to say. When he left, I opened his letter. He did not ask me to forgive him. He did not blame Rachel. He listed what he had done: the lies, the mail, the valuation, the documents, the pressure, the car keys, the photographs. Then he wrote, I kept telling myself I was protecting my family. The truth is, I was asking my mother to pay for my failures because I was too ashamed to admit them. I folded the letter. I cried. But I did not call him. Forgiveness, I had learned, was not an emergency. Over the following months, I allowed David back into my life slowly. Coffee once, lunch another time, a telephone call on Sunday. I did not give him a key to the house. He never asked. That mattered. Samuel preserved all the evidence related to the trust. I chose not to make an immediate decision about David's future interest. Consequences had already arrived. If I ever changed the trust arrangements, I wanted that decision to come from wisdom, not fresh anger. Emily visited almost every weekend. She helped me decorate for Christmas. When she opened the box containing the old ornaments, she found the ridiculous wooden snowman Thomas had made when David was 7. Grandpa made this. He certainly did. It's terrible. It absolutely is. We laughed until my stomach hurt. Then Emily became quiet. Grandma? Yes. Do you think Dad is a bad person? I looked at her. No. She seemed surprised. I think your father did bad things. Isn't that the same? No. I hung the snowman on the tree. If we decide people are only the worst thing they've ever done, nobody gets a road back. Emily considered that. But you don't trust him. Not the way I used to. Do you think you ever will? Maybe. I touched her shoulder. Trust is rebuilt with behavior, not promises. On Christmas Eve, after Emily returned to David's apartment, I sat alone in front of the fireplace. The house was warm. Christmas lights reflected in the windows. Above the mantel hung my wedding photograph. Thomas was smiling at me from another lifetime. I went upstairs and retrieved the old Polaroid. Then I sat at my desk and began writing a letter. Not to David, to Emily. My dear Emily, if you ever find this photograph, then you've discovered something your grandfather once hid from me. I stopped and smiled. Then I continued. I told her the story of the house. Not every ugly detail. Some burdens belong to adults. But I told her about sacrifice, about her grandfather losing his job, about my mother's inheritance, about overtime shifts, about fear, about starting again. Then I wrote, a home does not belong to the person who controls its walls. It belongs to the memories, sacrifices, truth, and love that were lived inside them. Never let anyone convince you that loving them requires disappearing for them. You can be generous without surrendering yourself. You can forgive someone without handing them the key to hurt you again. And when you make a mistake, tell the truth before shame turns one mistake into 10. I signed it Love Always, Grandma Martha. I folded the letter and placed it with the Polaroid inside a new protective envelope. Then I went downstairs. I loosened the wooden molding beside the fireplace. The brick still moved easily. I placed the envelope inside the hidden space. For a moment my fingers remained against the brick. Your turn is finished, Thomas, I whispered. I replaced everything carefully. The photograph was hidden again. But this time it was not hidden because I was afraid someone would find it. It was waiting, waiting for another generation, waiting for Emily, waiting for the day when perhaps she would need the same reminder I had needed. I returned to my chair. Outside, snow began falling. I looked around the room. There were photographs everywhere now. Thomas, my mother, David, Emily, me. I had not erased David from the walls because he had tried to erase me. That would have meant becoming part of the same cruelty. His photographs remained because he was still part of my life, just no longer the owner of it. I looked at my wedding picture above the fireplace. For months I had thought this story was about saving my house. It wasn't. Thomas's trust protected the property. Samuel protected my legal rights. Helen protected my courage. Emily protected the truth. But in the end, I had to protect something none of them could protect for me. My sense of myself. My right to say no. My right to remain visible. My right to love my son without surrendering to him. I leaned back and listened to the fire crackling. For the first time since returning from Indianapolis, I no longer felt like a woman defending herself inside her own house. I simply felt at home. And that was something no one could erase from the wall. Ketthuk Fan 15. There is something age teaches us, that youth often cannot love and surrender, are not the same thing. For much of my life, I believed being a good mother meant giving until there was nothing left to ask for. I thought protecting my child from consequences was another form of love. I was wrong. Sometimes the most loving word we can say is no. No, you cannot disrespect me because we share blood. No, you cannot make decisions for me because I am older. No, you cannot turn my generosity into an obligation. And no, forgiveness does not mean pretending betrayal never happened. I forgave David slowly, not because what he did became acceptable, but because I refused to spend the rest of my life carrying his worst choices inside my heart. But forgiveness came with boundaries. That distinction changed me. Growing older does not make a person less deserving of independence, dignity, privacy, or respect. The years we have lived are not evidence that someone else should take control. They are evidence of everything we survived to become who we are. And perhaps that is what Thomas was trying to tell me from the beginning. People can remove your photograph from a wall. They can pack your memories into boxes. They can speak as though your voice no longer matters. But they cannot erase your life unless you begin believing you deserve to disappear. I don't believe that anymore, and neither should you. If this story touched something in your own life, tell me in the comments. Could you forgive David after what he did, or would the betrayal have gone too far for you? And if you've ever had to set a painful boundary with someone you love, your experience may help another person reading the comments feel less alone. If you'd like to hear more stories about family betrayal, courage, and finding your voice again, please subscribe and stay with me. And wherever you're watching from tonight, remember this. You are never too old to reclaim your place in your own story. Sometimes the deepest betrayals do not come from strangers. They come from the people whose photographs we once placed closest to our hearts. And that is what makes them so difficult to face. We keep hoping that love will explain the warning signs, that family loyalty will repair disrespect, or that staying silent will somehow preserve the relationship. But Martha's story reminds us of something important. Loving someone does not require us to disappear for them. A lifetime of sacrifice does not make you weak. Growing older does not make your voice less valuable. And being a mother, grandmother, wife, or caregiver does not mean everyone else automatically earns the right to decide what happens to your home, your money, your memories, or your future. There is also an important difference between forgiveness and permission. Martha did not need to hate her son in order to protect herself from him. She could still love David while saying no more. She could leave the door open for healing without handing him the keys to her life again. Sometimes boundaries are not the end of love. Sometimes they are the only way love can survive without destroying the person who keeps giving. Perhaps the most powerful symbol in Martha's story was never the house itself. It was that hidden photograph. Her family could remove every visible picture from the walls, but they could not erase the truth of who she was, what she had sacrificed, or the life she had built. And neither can anyone erase yours. If someone has made you feel invisible, unwanted, or too old to have a say in your own life, remember this. Your story still belongs to you. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to say no. And you are allowed to choose yourself without feeling guilty for it. I'd love to know what you think. Could you forgive David after everything he did, or would that betrayal be impossible for you to move past? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Someone reading them may need your words today. And if stories about family betrayal healing and finding the courage to stand up for yourself mean something to you, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story. Sometimes one story is all it takes to remind someone that they still have the strength to reclaim their own.